Diana Walsh Pasulka is a professor of religious studies who is most well known for her two latest books, American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, Technology, and Encounters, Experiences with Nonhuman Intelligences, Explorations with UFOs, Dreams, Angels, AI, and Other Dimensions. Diana has worked as a consultant for Amblin's Encounters docu-series on Netflix and well-known films including The Conjuring. In this interview, we discuss mind-boggling phenomena related to religion, UFOs, and consciousness. Timestamps are in the description. We hope you enjoy the interview. Thank you so much for doing this with me, Diana. To start us off, can you please tell me briefly about your background and your main areas of research interest?
Yeah, sure. So I am a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. And I grew up in California and studied at University of California for undergrad. I went to the Jesuit School of Theology, which funded my research into religion and Catholic history. And then I went to Syracuse University in New York to get a PhD focusing on religious history and philosophy, basically. Wow. And what I look at is I look at material culture, but specifically digital infrastructures and how they implicate and intersect with religious belief. And more specifically than that, I've been publishing and teaching about miracles and things that, extraordinary events within the Christian tradition.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, there's so many fascinating things there, like miracles is something I definitely want to circle back to later and other things too. I guess a good kind of question to kick us off is how do you, and again, like in a nutshell, because loads of these questions are probably things we could discuss for ages and, have an actual discussion on just these individual questions. But in a nutshell, how do you define religion?
Yeah, so religion, that's such a great question. And most people, so religion is a Western term. Mm-hmm. And if you go to, say, Kyoto University or, universities in other countries, they don't actually have a department of religious studies, right? So they have Buddhist studies and they consider that a philosophy and things like that. So religion is, and in religious studies, we define it in lots of different ways as well. Mm-hmm. So what is religion? Okay, so I like Jeffrey Kripal's, and I'm going to paraphrase him. Jeffrey Kripal is a professor of comparative religion at Rice University. Yeah. And he basically says, when you look at the history of religions, what you see sky gods and goddesses, sky entities, sky beings coming down and interacting and engaging with humans. And then you have, discourse around that evolves into religions. We're talking about like angels and things like that, or things seen in the sky that are considered to be gods and goddesses. You find that in ancient Greece and Rome and even today. But how I define religion is a set of beliefs and practices directed toward that which is considered to be of sacred and transforming power. So in the Western tradition, a lot of times when we look at religions, we look at them as monotheistic. We tend to see them like our own religions, the religion we grew up with, which could be Islam, Christianity, Judaism, things like that. But there are religions that look very different than that. We have atheist religions, right? We have religions that are based on fiction. These are called new religious movements, like Judaism. Yeah. So religion is a very big category, and we tend in the West to put a lot of emphasis on religions that look like what we think they should look like. But there's a whole variety of different types of religions.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, there's a really comprehensive answer. Thank you. And you're right, like in the West, when we think religion, we immediately think of, like the big boys, the big, like Christianity and Islam and maybe Buddhism. And you're right, there's going to be others. And the various kind of denominations or the main denominations of Christianity, I guess, like Catholicism and Protestants and everything like that. But yeah, the Jediism was an interesting one that I learned about through your book, or I'd heard of it before, but I kind of had a new kind of take on it from reading your book, American Cosmic, which was, I think it's kind of a cool religion, right? Like you said, based on the Force and everything like that.
It is.
The Force, from everything I've learned from all the people I've spoken to, and there's lots of science to back it up, essentially the Force is a real thing, depending on, how you word it and how you want to look at it. And there's every culture and every religion has a different word for it. It's essentially the Holy Spirit, right? I suppose. In the same breath. Do you think all the world's religions, or the vast majority, or the majority, or however, how many of the world's religions have common roots? And are those roots kind of based in reality? Are they rooted in reality?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there are commonalities and patterns within even Judaism and Christianity. Have, you just said, oh, that looks like the Holy Spirit. A lot of Christians, when they look at Star Wars, say, oh yeah, that's like the Holy Spirit. I've heard them literally say that. Okay. So yes, so there's a reason why there's my field, religious studies, and it's interdisciplinary. So we have archaeologists, historians, people who do, comparative religious studies, things like that. Even literature and religion. So the thing about this is that, yes, there are commonalities within these religions, and most people in the world are religious. So it's people who are secular who are actually in the minority. Mm-hmm. And if most people in the world are religious, we basically should study religions for this reason, that they seem to inspire behavior that is like ultimate behavior, right? So people will die for their religion. Yeah. They won't necessarily die for their political ideology, although they might. But religion, they definitely would, people have died for their religion. So religion inspires behaviors. And I think that that's what makes it very important.
Mm. Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. Yeah, people will die for their religion. They'll kill for their religion. They'll get married into a situation that they're not necessarily happy with for their religion. Like, yeah, it's a lifestyle. It's everything, right? They live and breathe.
Yeah, it's like really it's old. Yeah, it's transformative. So if we're looking at something that inspires these kinds of behaviors and mass behaviors, masses of people do these things, I think we should pay attention.
Yeah, definitely. And lots of people do it out of fear, and lots of people do it out of like the opposite, I guess, out of like more like love and openness and curiosity. But there's a big amount out of like that God fearing, I guess, is like the kind of phrase that comes to mind. You said most of the people in the world are religious. That doesn't surprise me, although it's kind of surprising to hear it in a way.
It is surprising to hear it,
like, it's kind of it's logical, but at the same time, I'm like, oh yeah, weird. But do you have any idea of a percentage, like, or like a rough percentage of like how many of the people in the world are religious in some form?
So let's take the countries that are secular, right? Secular countries that propose to be secular. Look, the United States proposes to be secular, but more than 85% of people in the United States claim to be theistic. They claim to be, religious in some way. Okay. Yeah. So then you have to do an analysis of what are actual places on earth where people live, where they're secular, they propose to be secular, but they're also atheist. Okay. And now you're looking at, places in Western Europe, right? So, France is culturally Catholic, but, people claim to be atheist. So, you have maybe like 15% people claim to believe in a God in France. So it looks like a very secular, truly secular society. They don't have a large population like India or the United States, or so we're looking at small percentages. You do have China, which officially is a non-religious secular, but you do also have people who claim to be religious within that country. So I don't necessarily, if you asked me about, I don't know, 2 years ago when I was teaching my summary of religions, I would have a statistic for you. But I would say that I can't give statistics in good faith and say that they're accurate. Yeah. But I would say that there are billions of people who are religious and claim to be religious, but I don't think there are billions of atheists.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes total sense, because you're right about how hard it would be to put a proper statistic on that, seeing as even if you go down to like individual people, there'd be so many out there that have such nuanced views that they're like, yeah, I'm religious. But when you really drill down into it, after a 10-minute conversation, even, you could probably make them realize that, in fact, you're not really religious, are you? Your parents told you they were religious. And so you know, that kind of religion. But yeah, it's really interesting. Why are the world's dominant religions the world's dominant religions? And why and how did they split into so many denominations and offshoots? Because with Christianity, for example, sorry to jump back in, with Christianity in particular, I have some Christian family, and I often think like they sometimes they tell me their views, and I hear different views from different family members, and I always think that, like, there must be
thousands, tens of thousands, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of like very individual denominations, because it's kind of unique to the person, I think, right, a lot of the time. And so like one person might they might go to the exact same church and hear the exact same sermons and have the same kind of general beliefs, but then when it comes down to it, one of them thinks, oh yeah, good people can still go to heaven, and the other one's like, no way, they have to believe in God to go to heaven, even if they're really good. They if they don't believe, they go to hell. And I think there's always these intricate details. So anyway, back to the question, why are the world's dominant religions the world's dominant religions, and how and why are there so many offshoots and denominations?
That's such a great question, and I'm going to answer it with your own example, Christianity. So my it's not an intuitive answer, but it is the answer. So the answer is why do we have these religions of specific locations? How did that happen? And then why did they split into different types of denominations? And, how did that happen? Okay, so let's answer the first question. First of all, my answer is technology, which is why I study, technology and religion. Yeah. So the first answer is that it's obviously these religions are regional. Okay, so religions are like plants. They grow up in specific areas, right? They're belief systems that are indigenous to certain environments. Christianity, is in a certain environment, and it gets spread, right, through cultural diffusion. People migrate to other places, they bring their religion, and that's how it spreads. Okay, so you have these migratory routes of different types of religions, but they're not global religions. So let's take Christianity, because it's very specific how the two major denominations of Christianity, one which is Catholicism, which is the largest denomination of Christianity, and Protestantism, which has, I think, more than 10,000 denominations, by the way, of Christian denominations. Yeah. How did this happen? This happened through the printing press. Okay, so the printing press was able to bring information to people fast, let them read it on their own, because they were, it helped, people started to read once they were able to get things that, like documents. And of course, religion was what was the hot item. It was the viral item in the 16th century. So it facilitated this schism, which the person who's identified as the person who, is responsible for this is Martin Luther. But he was a Catholic monk. He didn't actually want to create a new religion. It just so happened. And it just so happened because of the printing press. So he had arguments with the Catholic Church, which he ceremoniously, put on a church on All Hallows Eve, right? So Halloween, just before All Souls Day and All Hallows. Okay, so basically, which is a Catholic holiday to pray for those who have departed. So he has issues with their indulgences, like, hey, let's pay the Catholic Church, a sum of money, and they'll pray my grandmother who might be in purgatory, they'll pray her out of purgatory. Well, that was wrong. He said, that's wrong. It's just, you're taking money from poor people, because they care so much about their grandmother and such. And so this got out and spread through technology. Now, if we look at technology today, especially with the internet, people are having these experiences that they consider to be religious. I use the UFO as an example of this. And they have an experience of a UFO event, a UAP UFO event, and it's spiritual to them. And they post that on social media. And, you go to Reddit or you go to Twitter, and there are these communities dedicated to people who have these experiences. And so this is a new form of spreading a certain type of religiosity. So you can see that technology is the medium for the communication. So it's basically, migratory routes are now technological. They're no longer just, we no longer just go there in boats, or walk there, right? We type there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And I guess it's like I don't know the right word, it's not coming to me, but just like an explosion compared to what it used to be like with, how things can spread and how things can like change shape and everything like that. It's fascinating. I've got a list of phenomena, I guess is a good way to word them, that I've written down. I wanted to grab your kind of brief thoughts on the phenomena and on their potential reality. So they're all kind of obviously tied to religion, but they're not necessarily specific, like only tied to religion. Like they can, I think lots of these things can have merit outside of religious belief. But anyway, so start with predictions and prophecies. So this is something that's big in like Christianity again, and the Bible. You know, lots of Christians will say that the Bible's laid everything out and it's all in there, and you know, they said there's going to be wars over the black gold, which, you know, they always tell is oil, and like we're in the end times and everything's pointing to that, and yeah, basically that it's all been laid out. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that like real? Is there stuff in the Bible that's like actually coming to fruition, and is that just coincidence? Is it the same in other religions? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Right. So you're talking about apocalypse.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
So,
other like
yeah.
just general predictions and prophecies, but that would be the biggest one, I guess, of like coming towards the end times. Yeah, the headliner.
Yeah, the headliner. Yeah, the apocalypse. So apocalypse being a Greek word which means revelation, like to be revealed. Okay. So all right. So when I began doing work in looking at people who have experiences of UFOs, I met a lot of people who were experiencers, and a lot of them had very similar ideas that the world was having some issues like soon, right? And this was about 10 years ago. And they said, you know, some of them even went so far as to make huge gardens in their backyard and grow vegetables and, you know, do these things that they thought they needed to be sustainable because they felt like really truly the end of the world was going to happen, and it was probably going to happen next weekend. Okay. Well, in religious studies, if you happen to have studied Christianity or Judaism, you know about apocalypses because they've been around for about 2,500 years. Okay. So people have had these experiences. In fact, when Jesus was crucified, he was crucified for treason by Rome. His followers thought he was coming next weekend. He was coming back next weekend, right? So they literally thought that it was going to happen, but it didn't. So, you know, so what I'm saying is that these ideas are urgent. And when people have religious experiences, they urgently change their lives. They urgently, you know, these things, there's an urgency about them. I don't look, they might occur, they might not occur. But what I have to say is that we've had these now for a long time, thousands of years, and people have been, you know, gone up on the mountain and waited for Jesus to come. And then, you know, all of their friends are like, what are you doing up on that mountain? You know, and then they're embarrassed and they come back down. In 2011, there was a gentleman here who's since passed away in the United States, who basically told people that the apocalypse was going to happen on this date. I think it was like May 11th or something. And a lot of people gave their money to him so he could spread the word. And so he took the fortunes of these people, he took their retirements, he even took the money that was put aside for their children to go to college, right? But the apocalypse didn't happen, you know?
Yeah. So, but do you
that
think
doesn't say that that doesn't mean to say that. So there are different apocalypses. There are even secular apocalypses, right? So we're in a climate change apocalypse. Like a lot of people are saying, the apocalypse is going to happen because of climate change. A lot of these people are not religious. They're scientists.
Yeah.
And they're saying this. So they're saying we are coming to an apocalypse. It could just, you know, I have no opinion about if it's going to happen or not, because I've just been, I guess, so aware that these things have been around for a very long period of time. Like almost every 20-year era will have its idea of an apocalypse. Some communities have experienced apocalypses. So we have indigenous communities that didn't survive smallpox when, you know, English people or French people came to my country, the United States, before it was the United States. They literally just did not survive.
Yeah. And
they definitely experienced an apocalypse. So that's not to say that apocalypses don't happen. Extinction events is another way to put it. They definitely happen.
Yeah. What about prayer? What are your thoughts on prayer? Again, it's something that is obviously one of the main features of many of the world's religions, especially the most known about religions, like we said earlier, like the ones that we think about in the Western world when we say the word religion. And prayer is something I don't think there's been much, like, in terms of actual studies into it, like, but I'm aware of a couple that they've done, like, that were kind of based across various religions, not really one religion specific, but there have been some studies that show that there might be some effect to prayer, and it kind of goes along with other things I've looked at in terms of consciousness and things like that. But what are your thoughts on prayer and its potential reality?
Yeah, so this is so there have been studies on prayer. So some studies have been done at Duke University. There have also been studies and ongoing studies on practices of mindfulness and meditation. Okay. And these studies have shown that it's beneficial for you.
Yeah.
It's beneficial for your health. It's beneficial for your brain. It actually changes your brain chemistry even. Okay. So, and prayer and meditation are actually roots of the same practices. So if you go back into Christian, a lot of, some Christian denominations say, oh, meditation is, you shouldn't do that. Well, that's what centering prayer is. Like prayer, if you go back to the monastic traditions within Christianity, you'll see that they're doing what looks like meditation, right? They're sitting in their cell and they're focusing on the ultimate goodness for them is God. Okay. So they're quieting their mind. I mean, it's even in the Bible. Jesus says, go into your quiet space, your closet in your house and quiet your mind and know that there's this God. Okay. So looks like meditation, just different language there.
Yeah.
Okay. Different language. Okay. So what do I think about it? I actually do believe in it. I believe that the people that I've been in contact with since 2012 onward, who have been super high functioning people, but also have lives that they like enjoyable lives, and they're productive and doing well and making really changes in society for the better. Without a doubt, every single one of them has some type of a practice of prayer or meditation. Every single one of them. So based on that, I think that, and what I've learned about it, I think that it's effective.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I just think that people don't actually do it.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, because sadly in the United States, we have school shootings. And at my university, we've had lockdowns. I've had friends visiting me at my university where we'd have to lock ourselves into my office. My kids have been at school and then got a notice that there was a school shooting. And a lot of people then say, oh, prayers. But a lot of people say, we don't need prayers, we need different policies. Well, of course, we do need different policies. But prayer also does help. If more people prayed, maybe we wouldn't have that many, of the, this type of situation. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think people just don't do it. They think that you could just pray, something. Actually, it takes a very, very concerted effort to have a practice of prayer and meditation. Like, you actually have to learn how to do it. You have to set aside time in your life to do it daily or more, weekly or whatnot, right? It's just not a one-off that you can do. Oh God, please help me find a parking space. People do that. That's not prayer.
Yeah, it's not just a quick a verbal message to something. It's more like getting into that, like you say, like a deeper state, a meditative state, a different, maybe an altered state of consciousness, and like you say, it's a deeper thing. But anyway, I think it's fascinating. It's like obviously it comes up in all religions, or essentially all religions. And I think if anybody was to watch, my entire collection of interviews that I've done with various scientists, academics, researchers, experiencers, you're going to see that it's a kind of fits really with this kind of bizarre thing we call reality, this bizarre the reality that we all exist in. Can
I say something more about it?
Sorry. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of people in the West, in, England or in the United States, are very unaware that this idea of prayer has been central to the formation of our communities. So if you look at the churches, you just go through and look at the churches, especially in England, say in your country, or even in Europe, and you'll see that a lot of times you'll find anchorite quarters, like cells attached to the old churches. And that's where a person lived who was absolutely just dedicated their lives to prayer. And that person was important for every community. Every community had a person like that. And it was thought they took care of those people. They fed them, they made sure that they were well, because it was thought that person somehow was helping the entire community. Even if you go to Ireland, there's a place called Skellig Michael, the rocks of St. Michael. I don't know if you're aware of those, but they're off the coast of Western Ireland.
I think I've heard of them, yeah, but I'm not too familiar.
If anybody has seen Star Wars movies, they will have seen this place because they actually filmed there in The Last Jedi.
Right.
So The Last Jedi,
where Luke was staying, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an actual place. I've been to it, and it's about a quarter mile outside of Ireland, and monks lived there in the 7th century, and when you go there, you're like, how the heck did they get here? So what they did was they brought all their animals, and they brought, but they lived there, and they built quarters up there. And what they did, it's almost as if their entire existence was dedicated to prayer.
Wow. Yeah.
And that prayer was basically to help all of Ireland.
Wow. That's amazing. I wasn't aware about, like you said, these cells kind of attached to the church and things like that, and people would bring them stuff and they'd essentially live there. That's incredible. That's really, really fascinating. It's kind of like a different take on the shaman idea from, different cultures and things like that. It's like a Western shaman almost. But yeah, it's really, really interesting.
And look, we have no cultural memory of that. We have no cultural memory of that, but it's still in our material culture. So when you go to the old churches, they'll have that there.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I've probably, we've all been to an old church. I've probably seen like this little room, and you're like, "What's that?" And I guess some of the time it was this. It's really, really interesting. Another kind of phenomenon, let's call it, or that's probably the only word I can use for it. Another phenomenon that very, very connected to prayer, a lot of overlap, and in fact, lots of people pray for this. Would be like kind of anomalous healing, or healing, through a god or through prayer, or these kind of things. Because again, that's big in religions. This is something a year or two ago I thought would be nonsense, right? Healing via anomalous means. I'm now aware there is kind of research into these areas with like scientists that look into various ways of anomalous healing, which is kind of mind-blowing stuff. And it's a rabbit hole. But yeah, what are your thoughts on prayer in religion and its potential, healing in religion and its potential reality again?
Yeah, this is really interesting. So in the history of Catholicism, so the Catholic tradition, there's a tradition of making saints. It's called the canonization tradition. How do we decide who's a saint? That kind of thing. Mostly we decide because there's a miracle associated with that saint, and it happens usually it's a healing. Okay, so I spent a lot of time looking at the canonization. I
was going to ask you about miracles as well. I was just going to say, if you want to kind of do both of those at once, like, because miracles was going to be my next one. So if you want to mix that in, like healing and miracles, whatever you want. But please, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The canonization.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so a lot of times, the organic way that this began in the Catholic tradition was that, and this is before the 1500s, okay, so this is a very long time ago, is that communities would have local saints, like somebody they know lived a holy life, they would die, and then they would pray that person pray to God for them. It would be called intercessory prayer. So they would say, Saint Richard, or, somebody, please, Saint Christopher, my aunt is sick, pray that God heals them, and something like that. Okay. And then the healing would happen. Okay. And then that saint would acquire a reputation. During the time of the 1500s, when science was making its entrance into, it's an early modern time period in Europe. So science is coming along. Some of the popes were quite rational people, and they thought, we can't just identify these people, these like deceased people, as holy and saints. We actually have to put this through a process of rational inquiry to figure out if a miracle actually happened. Yeah. And that's where this saying called the devil's advocate, it comes directly out of this tradition. So the devil's advocate, it was an actual position in the Catholic Church. The devil's advocate was this person who basically made sure that this was a holy person, that no one was lying. And they took, they would go to the village, they would interview people. It was almost as if they were getting a clearance, right? They were doing, because in the United States, in order to be a police officer, or in order to have some kind of like very important position here, even if you want to join the FBI or something like that, your kindergarten teacher is interviewed. Your brothers and sisters and cousins are interviewed. Your neighbors are interviewed. Everyone is interviewed. So this is exactly what it was like during this time period. So so they would make sure that this was an anomalous, supernatural event that could not be explained other than reference to maybe something supernatural. What I found when I started to do experience or research into people who have had experiences, and I do write about this in American Cosmic in the chapter on Ray and Dulce Hernandez. So Ray is an atheist attorney, and he's married to a woman who is Catholic. And at one point, their dog is ill and going to die. And so Dulce prays for a healing. And after Dulce prays for a healing, Ray and Dulce experience what he calls a UFO, something unexplained, come into their house and heal their dog. So you do see these healings, but you also see things that are not so good too in UFO events. But you do see these things in, of course, within religious traditions, but also within the UFO culture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. I bet you've heard some crazy like anecdotes, right, about like prayer and miracles and things like that and healing. Like my nan is very religious. She's a Christian, and she always tells me this little story about. I won't go into detail. She doesn't really tell me in much detail, but it's like like an anecdote that's she just kind of has in her back pocket. She always tells a story about like somebody had a problem with their leg. I think one of their legs was like much shorter than the other one or something like that, and they prayed, like they took her to the church, and the minister or whoever prayed for her leg to grow or whatever. And my nan, the way my nan tells it, like they watched this leg grow, like, right in front of them, like just grow. And what do you say to that? I mean, when I was younger, I'd always say, yeah, come on, nan, like that, absolute nonsense. Now there's a part of me, I'm like, I wonder, like, it's still obviously insanely hard to kind of digest something like that, but you never know, like reality is really bizarre. And yeah, I bet you've heard some wild things too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the dog is pretty wild. And Ray's story is pretty wild.
I mean, the thing is that like there are things that are mysterious, right? That we can't say, hey, how does this happen? There are definitely those things. The Catholic Church has a department dedicated to study the Shroud of Turin. And I don't know if you know anything about the Shroud of Turin, but it's truly very strange. How did this image get on the shroud? It seems to be a certain type of radiation that a radiated image, and they think it's from the 13th century, but it might not be. And I mean, it's just so strange. And so they're trying to use science to understand these kinds of things. And by the way, they believe that science is compatible with miracles and things like that.
Yeah, which is refreshing, because like obviously we want to look into these things, we want to actually verify them, and we want to look at it with the scientific method, all of this kind of stuff, because if it's real, it should stand up, right? It shouldn't just be like, oh no, God doesn't want us to look into it, or like, oh no, that's the devil. If if it's bad, it's the devil, and all that kind of thing. Like, let's just look into it and find out. And I don't know if you've people will notice in a minute, this list of things I'm going through and getting your take on, they're going to get a bit wilder in a minute. So there's going to be more of the stuff that you talk about. And you're going to be aware of it. So just again, brief thoughts on karma, judgment, good, evil, these concepts that come up so frequently. Do you think there's anything to that, or do you think it's all kind of maybe a control mechanism, or where did that all come from? And is it based in any reality in your mind?
Okay. So this is where you get into so you can't actually, at least now,
can't prove any of this stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, it's true that there's evil. I mean, just look around us. So there's human trafficking. That's evil. That's really bad. But the question you're asking is there's objective evil without, is there something really objective?
Yeah, it's hard to kind of put words to it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there have been, this is something that philosophers and people in religious studies can put words to and have talked about. So, I would call myself there's this book called The Republic by Plato. He wrote it, more than 2,000 years ago, before Christianity. And he basically said that justice is a thing. there's a reality to justice, and so is goodness. Goodness is a thing. Justice is part of it. Okay. And that it's something that's objective of human experience. Okay. And he had some credentials to say this, because he found what we now call like the Platonic solids, which are these things that actually exist, but they're abstract. You can only understand them with your intellect. You can't, and now we can actually identify them with computers, by the way. So what he figured out so many years ago, we're now being able to talk about in classes at UC Berkeley, like say, doing mathematics and quantum, not quantum, but computing, things like that. Okay. So he kind of had an idea of something that I think is probably right. And this went on to inform Christianity. So there were what are called the Neoplatonists. So this is an idea that there is reality to the good, and reality to goodness. I believe this personally. Okay, I can't prove this, but this is what I believe. I believe personally that there are things that are intrinsically good, and acts of kindness are some of those things. They're intrinsically good. Okay, and you do them without caring whether or not the recipient, gives it back to you. Right? You do it out of the very fact that it's good to do, and you enjoy being that. You enjoy virtue. You enjoy it. So there's something really good about it. So that's my personal position. But I have another thing to say about that. This idea of evil, Plato actually didn't say that there was like an objective reality to evil. He didn't say that. That said, he did give some really interesting stories about stuff that looked like evil. And one of those stories is the allegory of the cave, where, I think everybody knows this allegory, but maybe not. But it's represented in ideas like the Matrix, where, humans are held in a place where they don't see reality. Reality is created for them, and they see that. And evil things are done to them. They're against their knowledge. They just don't know. And they could get dragged out of there. In fact, this is the cave. What Plato says is that somebody gets dragged out of the cave and they see that it's just, a facade, and that there's reality. There's some other type of reality. So that would be evil. That would be what Plato indicates as a form of evil, or let's just put it this way, it's not good. And I can say that seems relevant to our lives today, because we now have this idea of fake news, right? Like, we've probably always had it, by the way, but now we're more aware of it, right? And we do have that, and that's there's an agenda when people utilize it, and the agenda is they want power. Okay, so it seems structural. So I believe that there's a structural world within which we live where this kind of thing happens. What can we do about it? I think honestly, the only thing we can do about it is just cultivate our own goodness and virtue. I mean, I hate to say it, but I don't think we can fight it. If we try to fight it, what happened to Socrates? His way of fighting it was to educate people, and he was killed by his government.
Yeah. I think you're right. I agree. You can't, not one person can't take on something that big. You have to just try to do your bit to put goodness out there in the world, and to try and do good around you. What about your thoughts in brief on possessions and exorcisms, which are a kind of fascinating and slightly, frightening to a lot of people part of some religions? Catholicism, I think, is quite big and quite strongly related to this. So I'm thinking not just of, your run-of-the-mill possession and exorcism, if there is such a thing, but like diabolical possessions. And I've heard cases from another scholar who looks into lots of similar things to you, Michael Grosso. You're probably aware of him and his work. He's come across cases of, children speaking Latin, and things like that. And he said they're very rare, but I think he has come across one or two cases along those lines. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you do with that?
Yeah. So you see possession, and diabolical possession, in many, many different cultures. Even in non-Christian cultures, they have an idea that people could be, possessed by beings that are not Good. So it's something that I actually haven't studied it. Okay. I've come across people who believe it, and I've come across people who, you know, either said that they've had this happen to them or they've seen loved ones go through it. And I don't doubt them. You know, I don't doubt that this is a real phenomenon. It seems like a real phenomenon. I don't know how to discuss it with respect to my field. Like you know, I don't know, other than to look at it in a cultural context, you know, that, you know, a lot of people are so
that's
and
fine.
Yeah.
No, I understand. If it's not something you've gone into much and you don't feel, you know, you don't feel too comfortable to go into it. Like you said, it's something that lots of people report, and it seems like there's some credence to the reports. But yeah, it's something. Yeah, I appreciate and understand that you don't want to delve too far into it if you haven't looked into it too much. Is Stigmata something you've looked into?
Yes.
A lot.
So Stigmata is, yes.
Because that's pretty fascinating as well. And again, like these are where the things get a bit wilder, and like, because they have the kind of physical, you know, like it's not like prayer is something that's maybe, you know, I find it so hard to put words to these things sometimes. I'm like tripping over my words as I'm trying to speak. But yeah, Stigmata is something that, it has a physical manifestation. So again, what are your thoughts on that? And yeah, is it a real thing, essentially, in your mind?
Okay, so all right, so people appear to have it. Okay, so, and they claim to have it.
Yeah.
And most likely there have been fakes with it as well. The first person to have it was Francis of Assisi, and I used to know the exact date that he attained this. The Stigmata, for your viewers, is thought to be the wounds of Christ that appear on a human being. Okay, so, you know,
like
you
from
have,
when he was on the cross, like the hands and
exactly right, and mostly the hands that bleed either from the palm or the wrist. Okay, so Francis, now I just did a deep analysis into the primary sources for this when he acquired the Stigmata. He acquired the Stigmata through what appears to look like kind of like almost like a UAP event. So he's on this he's in this mountain, he's praying, and there appears something that comes down from the sky, and he doesn't identify it as Jesus, although in certain representations, artistic representations, the artist makes it look like Jesus. So when a lot of people see this, if they see the Stigmata of St. Francis, they'll see this being in the sky nailed to a cross coming down with flames all around it. That's not how he described it, though.
Right.
So people have to understand that what they see when they go to, say, the Louvre or some of these museums is going to be different than the actual experience that that person had.
Yeah.
Almost always is what I've found. It's very, very rarely do you see an kind of more accurate portrayal of now, but what did he experience? So the question is that, and what sources show what he experienced? Well, he actually wrote about his experience on a parchment of paper that he gave to his friend, Brother Leo. And then later people took that and explained. Now, when he had this experience of this, what he called a seraph, which is a type of angel. And he saw it, and it looked like it was suffering, but it also looked happy. So there's all these kinds of conflicting ways in which people describe sometimes these experiences in this being. And one of the sources said it dealt harshly with him, which means that maybe, well, yeah, it may have hurt him. And how it hurt him was he received these wounds. Now, these wounds hurt him so badly that eventually he passed away. Okay, so after about a year and a half or so, after he had this experience, maybe it was 2 years, but a year and a half at least, he then passed away. Brother Leo and he and maybe one other monk kept this quiet. They didn't tell anybody that he had these wounds. We don't even know if they were. I mean, I'm talking as a scholar now and not as a Catholic. Okay, so Catholics will say, well, of course he had the wounds of Christ, right? But the wounds may or may not have been exactly as, if the representations have changed, what really were the wounds like? So they describe the wounds much, much differently than how we see them portrayed. They're cleaned up a lot. But, this hurt him a lot. So he reported pain, and Brother Leo had to tend to him and help him. They were embarrassed by it. They didn't want the other monks to know. But when he finally died, they couldn't hide the wounds anymore. And they said, he has these wounds. We believe they're the wounds of Christ. And that's the first stigmata.
Yeah.
After that, other people, there were like copycat stigmatas around, right? And the Catholic Church did not at that point want to say that he had the stigmata. They did not. So there's a lot of, when you go into the actual like stigmata event, the original one in the Catholic tradition, there's a lot to the story and it gets really complicated. But that doesn't mean that people after that, in the way in which they pray and maybe have devotion to St. Francis, because he was a very charismatic person, wouldn't then have the stigmata. I just haven't looked into those, but Herbert Thurston has. So if you have viewers that are very interested in saints, there's a great book called, I think it's called The Physical Reality of Miracles. And it's by Herbert Thurston, who is a Jesuit who looked into psi in the early 20th century.
Cool.
Every book that he's written, people should read.
Okay, nice. Well, I'll check that out, and I'll try and link some in the description if I have space and can find them. But yeah, that sounds really interesting. But yeah, I think stigmata is fascinating. It's like kind of, I think it shows like the power of belief, right? Like I spoke to Dr. Ed Kelly, and he kind of talked to me about that, but also mentioned some, accounts of like, I think, somebody who'd been tied up, like I think kidnapped or something like that. They'd been tied up, they'd had rope put around their wrists and everything like that. And then maybe that later on they were reliving that experience through like hypnosis or meditation or something along those lines. And essentially the marks from the rope burn are like showing up again on the wrists. And I think another one, which is a bit different, is like a lady is like in a field and she watches her brother or her friend like mangle his hand up in like some farming accident. And she was heavily pregnant at the time. And then like, 2 months later, she gives birth and the baby has like the exact same mangled hand as the thing that she watched. And there's like these weird things that like, again, I just think it's this really mysterious riddle of reality. And another thought I had pop into my mind while you were talking was you were saying about how the paintings are often very different from the actual accounts, and it made me think of your book American Cosmic. And it's like essentially that every film and every docu-series that you see that's like based on real events, like when you dig in, it's like very different to the real events. Like it's based on it and some things are the same, but it's actually very different because it seems it's going to sell better or it's going to be more entertaining. And I guess it's essentially the same thing with these paintings. They were like, but this is what they want to see. They want to see Christ coming down in fire and fury and everything like that.
Well, I think also, I've really thought about why, because we're taught to do redaction criticism in religious studies, which means that we're looking at redacted documents, documents that are completely changed. You also see this in CIA, right? So it kind of prepared me to do ufology, right? Because here I am doing this, trying to get to the source and not to say that we can know fully what actually happened, but we can get a more accurate representation, a better idea of what happened. And I'm beginning to believe that because of the nature of these events being very traumatic, I'm beginning to think that it's a trauma response redaction. Mm-hmm. So not, of course, with the CIA. That's a very politically motivated response. But when we're looking at, this man who's super charismatic and loving and giving and, a good person, we don't want to see that he's been harmed. We don't want to see the brutality of the wounds, and so we clean them up in the representations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. Another one that's wild, a wild kind of phenomenon, incorruptible body phenomenon. Again, just in brief, what are your thoughts on that? And I guess I don't need to ask you if that's real, because that's real, right? Like we see some of these bodies. And I'm not going to ask you how, because that's a question for the future generations maybe. But what do you make of that? Essentially, again, just in brief.
Yeah. So, okay. So it may not be a question for future generations. We do have people that are, trying to figure out what's going on. And it's the incorruptible bodies, by the way, for those who don't know. So in the Catholic tradition, but also in other traditions. So you have this in the Buddhist tradition too, and Tibetan Buddhism. You have people who've lived really holy lives. And then when they die, their bodies don't corrupt. They don't actually disintegrate in a normal way, and sometimes rarely. So what is this? What is this? And how does this happen? In the Catholic Church, it's taken as a sign of a person who's a saint, right? That, and we just had a person who has an incorruptible body die here in the United States just recently, about a year ago. And they dug up her body because they were going to move her to another place. She founded a convent in the United States. And they found that her body was incorrupt. And then they're doing an investigation because they think, okay, here's one sign that this might be a holy person. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have various forms of incorruptible bodies. Sometimes it's the body itself. So there have been people who've lived lives of meditation who died sitting in meditation and their body's not being corrupt. So this would be one case. But they also have this phenomenon called the rainbow body. And I don't know if you know about that, but it's fascinating.
Don't think so, no.
Yeah, so the rainbow body is basically for a person who has lived this life of meditation. In the religion, they believe that there's some like frequency that the body has attained, like some kind of like holy frequency, and therefore during the process of death and a couple days after, their body disintegrates and just disappears. And then colors come around, and that's why it's called the rainbow body. There's a priest, actually, I wish I could remember his name, who does this research, and he's written a book called The Rainbow Body. And he basically did this research by going to Nepal, talking to people who have witnessed it, and also he correlates this to early Christianity, because that form of Buddhism and early Christians happen to be there in like early in Christian history. Like I think it was 5th century or something like that. They were talking to, Buddhists about Jesus and, resurrection and things like that. So he's connecting these two. And his last name is Tiso. So his father Tiso, Tiso. Fascinating research on this idea of incorruptibles, rainbow body, how this is, and why I say it's maybe a question for our generation is because I'm working with a physicist right now who's looking into miracles and things like that. And he has some really good theories about why these things happen. And they're totally scientific.
Yeah. Wow. So what do you know? Can you give his name, or is he not public or something?
I need to ask him before I do that, but I think he'll let me. But I could give you his name. I'll shoot him a text today and say, do you mind if we say he's known for things? He's known for UFO research as well.
Cool. Okay.
People could probably guess who he is.
Okay. Well, if he's cool with it, let me know. We can kind of put it on screen or something.
Okay,
but
sure.
That's fascinating. So another one, that just kind of blows my mind and is wild. And I think I know you've looked into this because it came up in your book. Something that when I spoke to Michael Grosser, we talked about this at length because he's written a book, The Man Who Could Fly. So I wanted to get your thoughts on levitation and, some of the most notable ones. I think Saint Teresa of Avila and of course Saint Joseph of Cupertino. What are your thoughts on this? Could it be real? And could there be some kind of crossover with UFO phenomenon? I'm thinking, in terms of abductions, when people are allegedly lifted out of their bed, they're levitated. Is there something there? Yeah, take it away. What do you think about all this?
This is really interesting. So this in religious studies, we call these ascent narratives. Okay, where bodies ascend, and it's usually within an event that has to do with angels or some kind of an event like St. Francis's event. And this is a kind of an interesting thing that happened. And it speaks to the place of synchronicities or strange, meaningful coincidences. You can't explain how this happened. So during the time period that I was studying UFO experiences and UFOs and our space program, I was working with this man who I call Tyler D, who is he's a mission controller, and his hobby is doing UFO research. And I was already supposed to go to the Vatican and look at the records of Saint Joseph of Cupertino in the Vatican. It's no longer called the Secret Archive, by the way. It's called the Apostolic Library. But it was the Secret Archive, and you need special credentials to get into it and things like that. It's hard to get into. I was asked to go there by a wealthy man who has since passed away, who was fascinated with this idea of levitation for the reason, he was Catholic, because he had an aunt who was a nun, and he'd seen her on many occasions levitate, and as a child and as a young man, and all of his family members did. And he also saw fires spontaneously combust around her, like something would just light on fire. And so, he's very interested in this. So he asked me if I would go to the archive and look at Joseph's record. Mm-hmm. And I was interested in Maria of Agreda, who is a Spanish nun, who said that she floated on the wings of angels and saw the earth spinning, beneath her. So I thought I'd go there and look at both of their records to get an idea of what was happening. Now, this was all had nothing to do, I thought, to my UFO research. Okay. I didn't think anything about it, actually. But when I got there, I recognized that that levitation is one of the foremost aspects of these UFO, propulsion, levitation, all these kinds of things. So I recognized that even though I didn't know it consciously, I was put in the right place at the right time to do this type of analysis of these records, with this person who I took with me to, who's already looking at propulsion and UFOs and technology and things like that. So I was put in the right place at the right time to do this type of thing. And what I found was that I definitely believe in levitation. I also believe that it occurs where there's a high percentage of believers. Mm-hmm. So if you look at where, levitation occurs, well, today it occurs with people generally isolated, unless they're like in a car and a UFO comes and, the whole family somehow levitates up and, they have missing time and things like that. Like there's so many people who have those experiences. So I don't doubt that people are having those experiences of UFOs and levitation. I don't know what those are, but I can also say that in the historical record, even up to the 1960s, where people in Spain identified these girls levitating and having what they call an experience of the Virgin Mary. Yeah. And they're having the same kinds of, things happening to them. They even see lights and beings, little beings and things like that. So it looks very similar. So I would say that I definitely believe in it. And one of the physicists that I work with, again, is studying levitation as well. And, for various reasons. I mean, of course, they're interested in it for propulsion. They're wanting to figure that out. And I'm just trying to figure out what's happening as an event for these people. And what I was going to say was, back when it was happening before, it seemed to happen to, let's put it this way, when Joseph's records were being looked at, people didn't believe it then either. So the Catholic Church sent people out to get credible witness reports. And this was during the Inquisition. So, you could actually be killed for lying to the Catholic Church. So people had gone on record, page after page after page, who they were, what kind of work they did, what family they were from, and then what they saw. And they saw Joseph levitate.
Yeah. And to double down on that, because again, I spoke to Michael Grosso about it in detail about Joseph. There were loads of people that verified that they saw Joseph levitate, right? And credible
so many people,
scientists and politicians, whatever. I don't know everybody, but a lot. And if anybody wants to learn more about Joseph, check out my interview with Michael Grosso, and there's more information in your book as well, American Cosmic. And that's where I learned about another phenomenon for the first time, which I don't know how I hadn't come across it, but I guess I'm always kind of learning about new things here and there, right? They pop out of nowhere. You're like, what is that? How have I never heard of that? So this would be bilocation, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yes, bilocation.
So again, in general, what are your thoughts on that and its potential reality? And to kind of add on, are there any corroborating documents supporting, like with Maria, I think was the one you talked about mostly in your book, but are there any documents supporting like really that these people were actually literally physically in two places at one time? And again, what are your thoughts on potential crossover with some UFO events? And again, I'm thinking like people like still seem to be in their bed sometimes while they potentially feel like they're somewhere else at the same time.
Yes. So this idea of bilocation, we don't know. We don't have any scientific proof at all for bilocation. But what we have are people who witnessed people here, and then at the same time, somebody's witnessing the same person somewhere else. And so the case of Maria, so she's in Spain, and my country is not a country yet. It's being colonized actually by the Spanish, and they're sending out people to come to the Southwest in order to see what's here, but also to talk to indigenous people here, right? Mm-hmm. And so Maria, at the same time as this is happening, she's cloistered, which means that she actually doesn't talk to people except for, her confessor and her fellow nuns. And from her cell, she feels that she's being taken by angels, like she doesn't know how, but she's being taken by angels up into space, where she looks down and she literally says, I see the earth spinning. Okay. And she's going to this place. She doesn't know where it is, but she basically says, I think it's the new world. Mm-hmm. And she describes the foliage there. And she also says that she meets people there. So she meets this indigenous tribe called the Humanos, right? And they're still here, by the way. And they believe in her. Cool. And so she speaks to them and she says, look, there's going to be some men and they're going to come and you need to ask them to get baptized, and this is how, she tells them about Jesus. And then she goes back. So she knows them specifically. She even knows one of them has a blind eye, like they can't see out of one eye. Okay. So she gives very specific details. Well, these men who have no clue who she is, this tribe approaches them and basically asks to be baptized. And of course they're surprised and they say, what? And they say, how did you learn about this? And they said, this woman, she was in blue, this woman in blue. And so they had a picture, a drawing of a nun, and they showed that, did she look like this? And they said, she was wearing the same clothes, but she was younger than that. And they were like, what? And so they went back to Spain and they heard about Maria. So one of them got an audience with her to figure out what was going on. And so word spread about this. And in the Southwest now, there are churches and statues devoted to her. And so that was, and oh, by the way, what was really interesting to me is that I had just been that man, Tyler. He actually took me, before we went to the Vatican, he took me to New Mexico to an alleged UFO crash site, which I didn't believe in, but I went. And it was around that area that she was. So when I was at the Vatican, I was reading this, I was thinking, wait a minute, I think she bilocated to a place very close to where I was.
Yeah, that's wild. Again, another like synchronicity in your work and your research that seems to kind of, strange how all that works. But yeah, it's such a fascinating and bizarre thing that's so hard to wrap
very,
around.
very, very strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Did she ever say so she was asked like, were you in two places at once? Or did she ever kind of go on the record as it were?
So
and like,
you have to understand now that, again, during the Inquisition, okay, so this is dangerous, right? What she's saying, because they could then determine that the devil is doing this or something, So she's really, once she gets a lot of attention for it, she becomes afraid. And so she's careful about what she says. And she says, I don't know. She says, I don't know if I actually did it in my body. I don't know if I, how it was done. Like, she's just trying to be as honest as possible.
Yeah.
At one point, she even says it never happened. Right. But then again, she comes back and she says, okay, it did. So another thing that happens to her is that what I find interesting is that one of the first things she writes has nothing to do with religion. It's a cosmology. So she basically writes about what she sees when she's in space.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Really interesting case. Really interesting case and phenomenon, like we said. Okay, so that's kind of my list of crazy phenomena to ask you about in regards to religion. So now back to some kind of more normal. Is there anything normal in this world? What do some of the world's main religions say about psychic phenomena and communication with the deceased, aka like mediumship or any kind of communication with the deceased? But I know that, some denominations of Christianity, probably some of the main ones, probably would say it can't happen, and or it's the devil's work and this kind of thing, particularly the communication with people that have passed on. But yeah, what's the overwhelming opinions of religions towards these kind of phenomena? Again, if in kind of a nutshell, if we can.
Yeah, sure, of course. So all right, so in a nutshell, we do have actually the 1800s in Western Europe and the United States and in England, what you have spiritualism. Mm-hmm. And spiritualism is, in my field, we call it a new religious movement. And we call it new because we take a big view of history. So it's new, but it was like in the 1800s, which most people say that's so long ago. Yeah. But in terms of religions, it's a new religious movement. And this basically took the mediator out, like took the priest out, took the minister out, and put people directly in contact with, their sacred, which was deceased people or, people on the other side, right? So spiritualists were people who felt that they could communicate with deceased people, spirits, and things like that. Okay, so there's a whole movement. Spiritualists are still here. We still have them. Okay, people go to see mediums and things like that. What do different religions say about it? I know that within Buddhism, once your meditation practice gets to a certain efficacy, once you're really good at it, you feel as if you are in contact with beings. Sometimes you see entities and things like that. You're supposed to ignore that, because that's an obstacle to your attainment of enlightenment. Okay, so in certain Buddhist practices, now there are many denominations of Buddhism as well, but I have not yet come across one that advocates this, mediumship. There could be, and I could be corrected. Okay, but I've yet to see it. Yeah. Mostly it's considered to be an obstacle in, that you should just ignore. So
not like evil or anything, just like a kind of, just ignore it and move on and focus on your goal in this sense.
Yeah. So there's Tibetan dream yoga, and people who are experts at that say this is going to happen. It just means that you've reached a certain attainment. And in a sense, it's a good thing that you've reached this attainment. But with a new form of attainment comes new obstacles. Mm-hmm. And just ignore it, because you'll think of it as a power. And that's wrong. It's not a power. It's just something that you've cleansed your mind enough to see this, see the future or see other realities and things like that. It's a good thing. You've cleansed your mind, but don't get stuck there, right? Is what they're saying. Yeah. Within Catholic tradition, there's this big idea called discernment. And sometimes people have a discernment of souls, where they're able to see either a person's future, or they're able to see the state of that person's soul, or they just have knowledge that normal people wouldn't have. And it's called discernment. So there's a whole category within Catholicism where this is a thing. Okay. It's a thing for your benefit, but only for your benefit for good. Okay. So if you get information that you're not seeking actively, but it comes to you, okay, that's probably a good thing, right? Like information about a potential car crash. I've had people tell me that. I've had people say, I woke up with a dream that I shouldn't get in that car. And that car then ends up crashing, right? There's a car crash. So that kind of stuff could be similar to, like, so, okay. So within Catholicism, it's not advocated. Do not do it is what they, promote. And this is, but they don't say that it's evil. They just say that it's a normal thing that happens to
They
humans.
acknowledge it. Yeah. They acknowledge it happens. They even have a word for it, which is called discernment.
Yeah.
Which is
discernment.
essentially like psychic phenomena. Yeah. Like precognitive stuff and various things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, the discernment of souls would be the more specific term, but discernment as a category can also just mean discerning if you should take a course of action. And that's not psi, that's just good sense or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's
or it could be in the middle.
forms.
Could be some kind of intuition that comes from, you don't know where it comes from exactly, and
right. Yeah. So there's also signs and wonders within Catholicism. Says, pay attention to signs and wonders. Well, what's a sign? A lot of people, it could just be someone saying to you, oh, you shouldn't do that, and then another person, like your mother, saying, I don't think you should do that. And two signs in one day. Probably don't do that. Yeah. So there's that kind of thing too. So I would say that most traditional religions are acknowledge that this exists, but they don't promote actively trying to identify someone on the other side. But there's spiritualism. Spiritualism is actual religion.
Yeah.
Where this is cultivated and people have an ethics around it and a protocol for it and things like that. So, so it depends on which religion you're talking about.
Yeah, of course. I know I know each one of these questions we could spend an hour, like I said, on all of them, because there's so many different religions with all various different viewpoints. And yeah, I know you did a good job answering it. You're doing well.
Thank you.
On these, I'm giving you hard work on these questions. How universal do you think, or how universal, as far from your research, how universal are depictions and descriptions of the afterlife, let's call it the afterlife, survival of consciousness? How universal are these? What are some of the main similarities and differences as well?
Right. So this is going to be a weird answer to your question. Okay.
Sure.
It depends on which culture, but in many cultures there isn't. So in our culture, we assume a linear progression, right, of time. We assume you're born, you live, you die, and then there's this thing called the afterlife. Okay. A lot of cultures don't have this kind of linearity to time. Okay. Some cultures have time conceived as different dimensions, and there are different spaces, and you could be living with your future self at the same time. It's just a different place that you're in. So those ideas are also present, but we just don't think of those in our culture because in the West, we derive this idea of linear time from most likely Judaism, and before that, well, in Judaism we have this idea of sacred time, right? That God creates the world, and then there's human time, and then there's, at the end of the world, there's the end of time, and then there's sacred time. Okay, so that's and now we actually live within that worldview, I think globally, because we all have ideas of 1900, 2000, 2024. I mean, that's a linear progression of time.
Yeah. Time is a very interesting and, again, hard to wrap the head around thing. There's lots of people looking into that from a scientific point of view, and I guess it's starting to seem more and more like time is not as easy to, it's not as linear, as you say, as we maybe are used to thinking that it is. But I'm certainly not qualified to go into that in much more depth. What are your thoughts on, or not what are your thoughts on so much as how common are some of the features of near-death experiences in regards to religions? So I'm thinking things like a life review after death, and or being greeted by deceased loved ones, things like that. Do they come up in religions at all?
Yes, they do. And there are a lot of patterns that are similar. A person named Carol Zaleski did a great book called Otherworld Journeys. And this is a book about near-death experiences. And what she does is she compares medieval near-death experiences with contemporary near-death experiences. And they look really similar. Yeah. I talked about the allegory. I mean, I talked about Plato's Republic, this book that was written a long time ago by Plato about his teacher Socrates, is the main character in the book. Well, at the end of the book, Socrates actually presents a near-death experience account, and it's called the myth of And is this soldier who dies. Yeah. And Socrates says that after he dies he's a soldier, he dies on the field fighting. And when he dies, he experiences this place where all these souls are, and everybody gets a life review. So this is, more than 2,000 years ago that Socrates was relating this story. So the soldier gets this life review, and he notices that people then if they've done well in their life and they've been kind, they get like 1,000 years of happiness, and then they have to get reincarnated, right? But they get to choose their life. Right. But if they've not been kind and they've done bad in their life, they get 1,000 years of something pretty gnarly bad, right? And then they I think they don't choose their reincarnation or something like that. So there's this idea, I mean, this is a long time ago, that people are talking about near-death experiences, and that it looks pretty similar, right, to kind of how people describe near-death experiences today. There's a life review, there's a judgment, right, and then there's some kind of either compensation, right, either a good one or a bad one. And today we have technologies that bring people back. So when people die, we bring them back more than happened 2,000 years ago, even 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. So we're getting more and more and more of these, narratives, these afterlife narratives. And I think they're fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with the work of Gregory Shushan, by the way?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because he's somebody else I've spoken to on here, and it's just, again, it kind of resonates with me with what you're saying, and with the kind of general, I guess, conversation we're having as well. Like, he's done lots of research into comparing and looking into near-death experiences and the afterlife throughout history and cultures, and he's a really cool guy. Fascinating stuff. Does reincarnation come up in religion? Like, I know in Buddhism, obviously, it's a big feature of that, and probably some others. I guess I'm thinking more about like Christianity. Are there any religions where it's not known to be part of it, where it kind of crops up in little parts here and there that people might not know about?
It does crop up. There are questions of this idea of reincarnation, even time within early Christianity. If you do read the Bible, actually, which I think, Christians, it's your book, you should read it, right? But if you read it, it's really difficult to understand, because a lot of things seem to contradict what Christians believe to be what it's supposed to say. And one of these things have to do with Jesus, like, there's in the New Testament, at one point, Jesus has like an apparition. He appears to be not himself, and he's flanked by these other people, and he's seen by his apostles, and he's, and he also talks about himself in terms of other prophets, like, is he the returned Elijah, or is he the returned, so there's speculation. So that indicates that there was speculation about reincarnation in those communities back then. As well, a lot of the communities, because these are Jewish communities, they're not Christian yet. Christianity doesn't happen until Jesus dies. So these are Jewish communities, and they have differing beliefs as well. And some of them don't believe in an afterlife. Okay, there's no idea of the afterlife. And some of them may get this idea of the afterlife from like Zoroastrianism, or from some of the more Hellenistic and Greek religions that are around, or things like that. So where the idea of an afterlife comes from is a good question, still debatable within the field of Jewish and Christian studies.
How would you answer the question of, is there a God or a God force? And again, I hate to put the limitation of you, but if you can, in a couple of minutes, which is obviously an impossible question to answer really quickly, but how would you go about answering that question of, like, is there a God? Is there a God force?
When you're saying a God, are you talking about an anthropomorphized version of a God, like a God, like
no, I'm talking in general.
A human type of looking thing, or
no? From my point of view, that would be kind of like that's what we've done, right? Humanity is like slapped a label on it, it's interpreted it, it needs a face, a name, But no, I'm talking in general. Like, if I ask you, we both are kind of aware of lots of this stuff. Like, in general, is there some kind of thing out there that could be labeled a God? Is there a God force? Be it some kind of universal consciousness? Be it something that we can't even begin to describe? Is there something that could be akin to that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I can only answer it from a personal perspective, my own opinion.
Yeah,
okay,
of course.
So my opinion is that a lot of religions are onto something. Okay, so that religion isn't going away because it's adaptive. Like, we are religious. It could even be emergent. I don't know. So the jury's out for me on why religion still persists. But this is my inclination, is that I'm more inclined to be like what Plato is inclined to do, is to look at these acts of kindness and acts of goodness as taking part in a reality that's beyond us. And I believe that's true. And I believe that that you see this in the influence of this in different religions. Different religions kind of identify something that's transhistorical, right, objective of human beings, but of which we can take a part. We can take part in this, and those religious practices like enable us to take part in this thing, which Plato calls the good. Okay, he says it's like the sun. You can't actually look at it directly, but it gives light to everything. Right. So we see its effects, but we can't actually talk about it. In Taoism, the famous line, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Like you can't talk about it, but then there's a whole book about it. This is what it's like. Right. And so I think that a lot of people feel that there's something like this, but they can't talk directly about it because it's ineffable. Right. You can't say what it is, but you see the effects of it. And I do believe that our ways that religions are technologies, they have technology, like they have certain practices, like a template, an algorithm, whatever you want to call it, to hook us into these things, this good.
Yeah. Totally with you. Great answer. And I think it shows up outside of religions as well, right? I think like it's kind of ubiquitous.
It existed before religions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it exists for people that are total atheists and things like that and have never believed in anything in their life. They'll still have an experience. Not every atheist, obviously, not every person, but these experiences are very much not limited to people that are religious. You said the sun. Then you used the sun as a kind of as a metaphor, an example, which takes me on to ask you about the miracle of the sun. What again, in brief, what is your take on that series of events? And it's kind of a good linking point for us to start moving to talk more about the UFO phenomenon as well.
Yeah. So once you start to look at the original sources for these events, like the Fatima in 1917, 3 kids in Portugal have a series of events, which then gets interpreted to be a Marian apparition, an apparition of the Virgin Mary, where she appears to them, and consistently. And then she says she's going to provide proof that she's there. And this word gets out, and thousands of people come and witness on October 13th this event that's now referred to in Catholic culture as the miracle of the sun. And people see it, by the way, miles and miles away. Even people who are not even related to the event don't even know it's happening. They see some solar phenomena happening. And the Catholic Church takes a long time to identify this as an actual supernatural event, but they do. So people like atheists are there, doctors are there, scientists are there, lots of people are there. The newspaper, journalists are there. And they see things, everybody sees something. They don't all see the same thing. Some of them see a disc coming toward the earth and it looks like it's going to crash and they're all afraid. Most of them, all of them experience rain, and then the rain stops and then their clothes are all dry. So they do experience these supernatural effects. And after that, to the children, as predicted by the Virgin Mary, as she's identified by them, they pass away. And then the last one, Lucia, she becomes a nun, and she has to take vows of silence. So she's quiet for all the rest of her life about the event.
Wow. It's an incredible event or series of events. What do you make of it? Do you think it was, I guess, I mean, I don't even know how you'd begin to answer what you make of it, I suppose. Like, it is what it is, right? Like they've reported what they saw, and so many people
your question is good. Yeah, okay. Your question is good. What do I make of it? Yeah. So, so when I first started to look at the UFO phenomena, I actually identified it as very similar to a lot of the things that happen within Catholic culture. That's what led me to do it. I'm a person who has looked at Catholic culture, right? And I've looked at these specific types of events. I have to say that it shocked me to recognize that the parallels were striking. Okay. And so that led to further study. one of the first things I began to study were, well, first Francis of Assisi, but also Teresa of Avila. But after that, I started to look at Marian apparitions. And I've always been interested in Marian apparitions. The more I learn about them, the more interesting they become to me. Because once you start to look at the sources, and by the way, once a Marian apparition happens and it's verified by the church, generally all those sources go to the church.
Right.
So you either have to be, you have to have, I compare it to the need to know that we have in, CIA. You only get to know this if you have a need to know. So it's the same thing with the Catholic tradition, especially with respect to the miracle stories. It's not transparent.
Yeah.
And they don't have to make it transparent. So a lot of people are upset about that. So a lot of people have asked me, won't you ask the church to make this all transparent? Well, they've been around for a long time. And, our country is only around approximately 200 years old. And, they get to say what they want to do. They're not a democracy, so we're forcing our, democratic ideals on this pretty old institution, country, basically. They get to decide what they do with their sacred information, and it's theirs. So, but that said, I know people who got to see the original sources before they were sealed.
Wow.
And they've written a book. And I'm going to give you the name of that book so you can post it for your viewers. Awesome. I think Jacques Vallée actually wrote the introduction to it. But basically, it was two researchers who went in and looked at the sources and identified that the first thing the children saw was like a being, like a shiny youth on a spinning disc that came down and announced that they were just about to have these experiences and that they better start praying. And so they did. So they were impressed, and they did. They started to pray. And then the youth came again, and then this woman who floated on kind of like a disc-shaped cloud announced that she was there and she wanted them to pray. And by the way, what's really interesting is that they're always talking about praying. So the messages of the being Virgin Mary is that people need to pray and be better. They just need to be better. And if they're better, it's going to avert some pretty terrible things. Some people in my field have done this study, and they've said that when the Virgin Mary appears to a community, that community is in danger. There's usually war around it or something like that. So when I look at this type of phenomenon, I think this is almost like a counter to it. Like, this being shows up, the sacred being to this culture shows up basically to help them get through what is happening all around them. Is the insisting on prayer? We talked about prayer already. My question, I can't answer it, but this is my question. Is the prayer a way to counter what's happening and maybe even change it? Is her insistence that great quantities of people pray in order to, because we may have forgotten that prayer is something important for us to do. And, and she's basically helping us understand that, pray, fast. She also says fast, do these kinds of things that could maybe help. I don't know. That's just a question that I have. Like, why are these things happening? So once you start to look at the particulars of the situation, it does look very similar to UFO events, some UFO events, not all, but some UFO events look like that too.
Yeah.
And have very similar aspects. She can read people's minds. Okay. So she knows what's in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting as well. That's another overlap. Wow. How strongly do? Oh, yeah.
And she speaks without moving her lips.
Oh yeah, okay. So like telepathy, essentially. Again, yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's such an interesting case, and again, you talk about it in your book, American Cosmic. So if people want to, learn more about all of this stuff, it's a good kind of, your book is going to go into more detail on all of this. How strongly do religious accounts of angels and or other similar beings correspond with UAP, UFO accounts from the modern day, or from relatively, modern accounts?
A lot of them look similar.
Yeah.
Like just different, they happen just in different time periods. So now we use this language, whereas 100 years ago we used the language of an angel.
Different labels. Yeah.
Yeah. But the events looks very similar. So there are, in modern UFO events, you have people like pilots. So we've never had actual, 100 years ago or more, when people had what they considered to be, experiences of unidentified flying objects, it wasn't in the sky.
Yeah.
They were generally looking up and seeing these things come down. But now we actually have pilots that are out there looking and seeing these kinds of things. And they have various different perspectives on it. A lot of times it's changing the reality, but not transforming it like a spiritual event, right? So they just say, I don't know what it was. If that's our enemy, we have to be afraid. We have to do something about it. That's the number one thing I hear from pilots. But I also talk to pilots who've had, who have a public face about what they've seen, and then a private. I call this the two data sets. And Jacques Vallée is the first, he pointed this out. He said a lot of times when you talk to people, they'll say one thing to authorities. They'll say, I saw this is what it looked like. And it's very straightforward. No weird, phenomena, right? They just say this. But to their friends and to people like Jacques, or even to me, they'll say, I felt like this was there reading my mind. I felt like it knew what I was going to do. And it followed me here. And how did it know I was going to do that? And, they have a much more nuanced, strange report, but they wouldn't make that public. So there is the problem of in reporting the two data sets. Another person who talks about this is Dr. Ia Whiteley. And I feature her in Encounters in my book. So she trains pilots and she also trains astronauts, but she also talks to pilots about problems that could lead to, pilot death and, death of, air crashes and things like that. So part of her job is to make aviation safer. So, and she's a space psychologist. She's a psychologist. So she identifies problems, and she says that a lot of the reporting of UAP, it's the two data sets. And a lot of times they won't report, because if they report it, they're not going to be pilots. They won't, sometimes they wouldn't be pilots. And she says they've trained their whole life to be a pilot. Do you think that they're going to report it if it's going to put their ability to be up there in jeopardy? So she's working on helping pilots report what they've seen, anomalous activity that they've seen.
Nice. Yeah, a lot of it, like you say, would be connected to the kind of stigma. And I think a lot of it would just be that even if there was no stigma, like some things are just so personal that they're hard to talk about at all, right? It's like in NDEs, I'm not saying that there's necessarily any crossover between near-death experiences and UFO experiences, but in like near-death experiences often won't be able to talk about half of their experience or certain elements of it, partly because it's ineffable, but partly just because they're so personal and meaningful and emotional and everything to them that like maybe that, they'll report their experience in general, and then 30 years later they'll tell somebody, oh yeah, and this element too, and I didn't feel comfortable to talk about that. And it's a problem, I guess, with when it comes to collecting data on these kind of things. How many how many religious texts and books and things like that seem to refer to what we could call UAP now? How common do things like that come up? Like, like the miracle of the sun, and how frequent, how common are those kind of things?
All right. So I'm going to kind of do a pushback a bit and say that we call it UAP, but that connotes, even though we're trying to get away from
too broad?
What it connotes. Yeah, but it connotes something that we assume is going to be a highly technological, craft from maybe another civilization or something like that. All right. So we don't know what it is. Just as back in, 200 years ago or 500 years ago, if people saw something like this, they would ascribe their own cultural terminology and interpretation to this, whatever it was. sometimes they wouldn't know what it was. And that's where you get a commonality, is basically Alex Dietrich, the fighter pilot, who is one of the people who saw the Tic Tacs. She described it. I was listening to her at a conference. We were both at this conference, and she gave her presentation, and I listened to how she described it, and I thought, okay, that moment of confusion where they see it and they don't know what it is. And she called it the WTF moment. Yeah. Right. So it was a WTF moment. And I thought, that's exactly how Teresa of Avila described her angel. She didn't use, of course, the word WTF, but she said, I don't know what it is. I assume it's an angel, but it's not the type I've ever seen before. Okay. So there's always this moment of, what is that? Basically, what is that? And it doesn't fit into any cognitive framework. So that, I think, is probably, we need to look at that more than did religions describe UAPs. And, what did they describe? They described things they couldn't fit into their framework.
Yeah.
And that's what we're describing. We're describing things that can't fit into our framework.
Yeah.
So that's a nuance that's lost on most discussions of what we're doing. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
The one person that I've talked to who does get this is a person who can't be named, but works for the intelligence community here. And he said his job is to go out and gather data. And part of what he does is that's exactly what he focuses on, is that moment when they can't fit it into their framework. He says that's the telling sign right there.
Yeah, like
when
you're trying to interpret it, you just can't, and it's just...
You can't. Yeah, it defies, it's very similar to religious language. Like, the Tao that can be told is not the Tao. Yeah. I'll try to tell you what it is, but I'm not going to be able to.
Yeah, you said it earlier, ineffable. It's ineffability. Again, it comes back to near-death experiences and all of these kind of things where we're engaging with something that we can't, put words to. What about orbs? That's something frequently associated with the UFO phenomenon and UAP, like unidentified anomalous phenomena. The orbs, like balls of light, how frequently do they come up in religious texts and things like that? Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, they're everywhere. Yeah, they're everywhere in religious texts. And they're also in the representations and painting and things like that, the orbs.
Yeah.
And also, if you look cross-culturally, like I was consultant for Encounters, the Spielberg documentary, and they went to Japan, which I said, you should go to Japan. There's a lot of this happening in Japan. And they a lot of it was cut out. They didn't actually include it, but they might include it in their next documentary. I'm hoping they do. But so in Japanese folklore, there are orbs, and lots of them, and they view them as souls.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Like, they come up in like so many different areas. Like, they come up with UFOs, they come up in mediumship as well sometimes, like in like physical mediumship. They seem to be all over the place, and there's cases where somebody was trying to communicate with like a ghost, for want of a better word, although that's such a it's like kind of worse than UFO in terms of so much baggage associated with it.
Yeah.
But when there was a case that I spoke to Lloyd Auerbach about, he's a researcher in these areas, and there was this consciousness essentially, and this boy was able to communicate with her, and she said lots of things that was verified in terms of, like, it's a longer story, I won't go into it now, but she said lots of things that made it seem like this is legit. This boy is actually able to talk to some kind of spirit here that used to be alive, and I think they asked her, because there were a few adults there, they said, can you ask her what she like looks like, what's her like form, or what does she... And it was basically a ball of light, is what she said, like a ball of light, like floating in the air. And so these orbs, they come up, and it's really fascinating that, even in religion, they kind of seem to think they're
everywhere.
Souls, like you're saying.
There's an expert on this who's written an excellent book, and you may have had him on your show, but it's Joshua Cutchin.
I haven't actually, no.
Oh yeah, he is the expert on the UFO as a soul vehicle, a vehicle for the soul.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and the UFOs and souls, like that's it's all this stuff is so hard to wrap your head around.
I know. Yeah.
When you visited the Vatican secret archives, did you come across anything that has popped back into your head since David Grusch went public and made his, gave his testimony? Was there anything that you were like, oh, that I thought that makes me think of that I read in the archives? Or is there anything along these lines? Is there anything that, popping into your mind?
Yeah, you're talking about the 33 crash and that type of...
Not just that, like anything at all, but yeah, sure.
Well, one thing that happened after David gave his testimony was that the language that he used was finally out. Like, because I feel like I met somebody in one of those programs. I talked about it. I went to a crash retrieval site.
Yeah.
So I was able to use language that he coined. He didn't coin it, but he used it.
He made it acceptable to say.
Yeah, people could actually now talk about it. And so, when I wrote my book, and finished it in around 2018 or so, I was, or actually 2017, it was in press. None of this was out there. None of this language was out there. But I had done I'd done those things. I went to a crash site. I saw crash retrieval parts. I met somebody who allegedly is part of a crash retrieval program. So I was able to understand what I did a lot more specifically, I guess you could say, because I had done it without any knowledge of any of this stuff. I did it completely rogue, right? I was out there on my own. And I could look back and say, that's what I did. Like that's literally what I did. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Basically, I thought, well, now it's all coming out. I thought it would take longer. Tyler did tell me what would happen when my book was published. And his timeline, he didn't actually give a timeline on certain things he did, but everything he said is actually coming true.
Yeah. Wow. So what it was next?
Well, it's all happening right now. So it's all, it's like an unveiling from the U.S. government.
So do you think, you think we're in the middle of basically disclosure?
I think that disclosure is something that is first of all, you have to understand that a lot of communities believe that they're in contact already. So if you talk to, say, Indigenous Australians from Western Australia, they'll say, we've been in contact. We know what these things are. And we've been in contact with them for thousands and thousands of years. I believe that. So I think that this particular form of disclosure is a Western military form.
Yeah. I agree. Like disclosure is such a wide word. Like disclosure of what do they even know in the government? How much are they going to tell us? What would count as disclosure? Like, if they tell us 10% of what they know, would that count as disclosure? It might to a lot of people. There's like different levels to it. But do you think we'll have some kind of meaningful disclosure from, say, the US government this year, like 2024?
I think we've had a pretty meaningful disclosure.
I guess that. Again, you're right.
They've said, we have. Do you think that they're going to show us anything that they have? No, not if it's going to be advantageous to the U.S. government technologically. No.
Yeah.
Why would they do that? So I want everybody who wants the U.S. government to come out with the bodies or the biologics or the technology, I want them to question, is that in the U.S. government's best interest?
Yeah. And would they do it, and why would they do it? Because obviously, they don't do anything if it's not in their interest. But you think it's a real phenomenon? You think it's a physical phenomenon? You think it's beings coming from another planet? What do you think is like? Do you think it's connected to, obviously, religion? Is it something like interdimensional? Where do you do you have a leaning? Again, I'm not asking for like a definitive, like we all kind of speculate. We're into more speculative territory. What are your speculations on say like origins of this phenomenon?
Yeah, so I'm parsimonious, which means I'm like we have to just go with what we can know.
Yeah.
And what I do know is that Dr. Gary Nolan, who I went to New Mexico with Tyler, has been studying these with, in labs, and he's a very well-known and well-regarded scientist. And he says that it's intelligently created, but not by us.
Intelligently
That's what he
created.
says. Yeah. So do I think we have physical things that are intelligently created, not by humans? It appears so, according to those scientists. Do I think that we have a program of reverse engineering? Yes, I do think that. I think that. Do I also think that we have artifacts, like, say, the Shroud of Turin and things like that, that are mysterious, and things happen that are mysterious, like incorruptible bodies? I do. I think that too. So, so it falls within those categories of things that, yeah, this kind of stuff happens. Life itself is kind of strange. Once you start to think about it, here we are on this planet, and wow,
Yeah.
So there's a lot that once you start to examine the things that happen and the things, that have happened, you begin to think, I think this is an interesting journey we're on.
Yeah, definitely. When you start to peel back the layers of the onion, like it's like infinite layers, and everything gets more bizarre each time. And each time you kind of go a bit further, you're like, no way. So that, like, and they all kind of relate in their own little way. And some things make other things seem more, you can believe something after realizing something else is true. And yeah, what are your thoughts on the abduction phenomenon? Let's just call it kind of what it is. What are your thoughts on that? Is that physical? Is it real?
Yeah. So the abduction phenomena is a real phenomena. People actually do experience this. I've met thousands of people, and most have not wanted me to reveal who they are. Like most of them, they're doctors, they're lawyers. They're like, not that say those are the most amazing people in society, but these are people that if they said what they did, it would hurt their career.
Yeah.
Police officers, right? People who are heads of tech companies have had these experiences, and some continue to have them. I don't doubt that they're happening, and they do. Once you begin to look at that, it looks like people in the Catholic tradition, 1,000 years ago or so, also had experiences that were similar. Once you start to see, wait, these experiences seem to be something that happened to people and across culture and through time. What do they mean? I don't know what they mean.
Yeah. Obviously, it's fun to wonder what they mean. It's fun to wonder about, like, what's the agenda of whoever or whatever is here, like, interacting with us. But that's, again, pure speculation. Well, not pure, maybe. Maybe there's some things we can go on, but it's very speculative. Have you ever come across any accounts, like, again, in religious texts or historical texts, of things that seem like they could be referring to essentially like a CE5 or cattle mutilation, or any of these little things that we kind of associate as like fringe parts of UFO lore or UFO phenomena? Yeah.
I have, and this is so disturbing. Like, there are things that I've done, in terms of research, that at some point I think, do I really want to continue this research? Because it's pretty disturbing. And one of those things had to do with like the mutilations, the cattle mutilations. So there's a I can't necessarily say which case it is, but it's a case that's been well documented, and it's in Argentina. And the person who described their experience, they described their experience, and it was very, very traumatic to them. And some UFO researchers have been following this person for years and years. And I happen to know about the case. I happen to know that there were cattle mutilations all around the area that were reported by farmers when this person had their experience.
Wow.
And that this person, saw, like, boarded a craft and this is what he was a child, and saw something like a cattle mutilation happening. And this was part of the trauma. And when it gets reported, it's very similar to what gets reported, like, with the stigmata. It's cleaned up. So there's a redaction process that happens, because I asked one of the people who did who just recently did another representation of this case. It's a well-represented case, and did a media representation and cleaned it up. And I asked them, I said, why did you clean it up? You know what happened, because I know that they knew. And they said, we just don't think that it would be good to describe exactly what happened.
Wow.
So so there are things like that. I also, I have stacks of, and I apologize to people who write to me at my university account and also who write me letters. I have so many that I can't respond to everyone. I try to. I have stacks of actual mail, hard mail, from people from years ago who wrote me. Some of them, the longer letters are written by people probably in their 70s and 80s, and they describe experiences that they had. And I found one the other day, and I just happened to read it. And I read the whole thing. It was about 3 or 4 pages. And at the end, they said, and then I started, when I followed the UFO phenomena, I stopped in the 1980s because I recognized that pilots were being hurt and killed. And then they ended their letter. And I thought, wow, they had this really long experience of having abductions and seeing things in the sky. And they thought that, these were benevolent beings that they were in touch with, and these, and then it ended that way. And I thought, and that really sobered me up,
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, it is. And it may, you were saying about like cleaning up the image of, like the mutilations and other stuff for like our consumption. And it kind of brings me back to the whole idea of, like, why is this whole thing secret? Why is everything so evasive? And is it, lots of people say, is it because in fact the reality is quite dark, and or at least has dark elements to it? It's kind of creepy, some of it. Any other thoughts on any other thoughts? And again, I know this could probably be a 2-hour conversation in itself, this question, but just in brief, any other thoughts on other potential connections, overlaps, gray areas, links, etc., between the UFO phenomenon, religion, anomalous cognition, consciousness, life after death? And I'm thinking, we've talked about levitation, orbs, bilocation, healing. Any other things that come into your mind as like, you're drawing parallels or what have you? Like I say, any blurry areas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you look at the formation of religions, how they kind of come together, that mostly it's very different, but there are some similarities here that you can say, okay, the major religions started this way. A lot of times the people who begin major religions don't intend to do so, and they've never written anything. So, you have to kind of like put together how these happen. And a lot of times they happen through technologies, like, writing was a technology a long time ago, right? Books were a technology a long time ago. Yeah. So we have different types of technology today, and therefore you have a different timeline for the creation of a new form of religion. And so I think that the UFO phenomena is this new form. It's like a global form. Recall that at the beginning of our talk, we talked about how religions, are regional, grow up, in regional spaces. Well, now we have a global way to connect.
Yeah.
And therefore we're seeing the rise of this new, what I call a new form of religion. And it's associated with sky beings. It's associated with the UFO. And I would tell people to be particularly cautious, because we're also at a point where we've studied religion and we know the kinds of things that can happen within religion, and the fighting that can happen, and things like that. I think we need to, as we move forward with this new form of religion, spirituality, I think we need to be cautious that, a lot of people think that if they have an experience like this, that they have like a messiah complex, or they think that what they're told by these beings is true and that they have the truth. I think that we've seen that, how can there be so many of these truths? I think we should, be cautious about this new era that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So many different truths and so many conflicting things and everything like that. And it's really hard to know what is the truth these days. And I guess that's the same in modern media, which kind of goes back to your ideas of, the connections between, and how, religion and UFOs and media and everything like that. I'm going to have to leave so many of my questions on the table. Hopefully we'll be able to get to them next time. Just a couple of last kind of quick ones. Have you ever seen a UFO yourself? Have you ever seen, or a UAP?
I actually have. I've seen something that I would call is unidentified. I don't know what it was, but it did have a lot of, I saw it here at the ocean, and I live at the ocean, and
Nice.
I was with my husband, and it was a very long day, and we decided to go sit at the ocean and just kind of do nothing, just, look out. And I kept seeing something. He was a non-believer, completely skeptic, right? And still is, actually. But something appeared up, out of the corner of my eye. I tried to ignore it. And I also heard an owl, which is so strange. So we were at the ocean. It was becoming, it was going into darkness. So it was evening. And out of nowhere, I hear an owl. So I'm looking around. And that's something that people report, but it didn't occur to me. I just thought, why an owl? This is so strange. And I was looking for it. And then everything seemed to get really slow. So I felt like time kind of slowed down, and I kept seeing something sparkle up out of the corner of my eye. And I looked and I saw something up there, and I thought, oh, I'm not going to say anything, because obviously if I say something, he's going to scoff at me. So I didn't. But it wouldn't go away. So finally I said, what is that? And then he looked at it, and he was like, I don't know what that is. So we looked at it for a while, and then it just disappeared. Wow. Oh, but that wasn't the end of it. So the strange thing is that I went home, and then I received a paper that Dr. Jeff Kripal was writing, but it hadn't been published yet. And he said, can you look at this paper and give me some, feedback? And it was about owls and UFOs. And I thought, wow, that's strange.
That was the same day.
It was the same day.
Oh, and then there's more.
within a couple of hours, of all people, Mike Cleland, the owl guy, decided that he was going to call me. Never talked to him before. Calls me. Yes. And then it still is strange. And by the way, that was on August 15th, which is the special day for Catholics. It's the Assumption of the Virgin Mary.
Right.
And then the very next day, the chair of my department knows that I'm studying this. And it was the beginning of a UFO flap here in my town. And it was reported on by a bunch of people, and it was in the newspaper. So he sent it he didn't know that I had this experience. He just randomly sent it to me. And I thought, okay, this happened. A bunch of people saw something strange. So that was my experience.
Wow. That's unbelievable, with all the added elements of the synchronicities, and that's bonkers. Where do you even what do you do with that? How do you even begin to interpret that? I guess ineffable, like we said earlier, the actual meaning behind all of that. That's fascinating, but that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. I was going to ask if you've had any other anomalous experiences, not necessarily UFO related, it could be precognitive stuff. Essentially, you just kind of gave me the most anomalous of all experiences, because it was kind of all of them.
Pretty weird.
But you don't have to go into any others in any detail, but just have you had other anomalous experiences? Anything precognitive, anything regards to psychic phenomena, anything regards to, any of this stuff, like communication with somebody that's passed away, anything like that? We can go into it next time, but just, yes or no, really, I know you've got to get going.
I feel like I've been in places where very odd things have happened, and I was witness to them. Mm-hmm. And I would say that this actually did happen. I was a witness to it, but if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have believed it. So I've had things that happen like that. That tends to be how my life is. I tend not to believe something. And then, I think most people are like that. You won't believe it until actually something happens before you're like, okay, well, that did happen. Yeah. I did see that thing. And with the thing that I saw, I don't know if it was military or, I'm
what did it look like? Was it just a bright light, or what was it like?
It was a vehicle, and it was kind of like a cigar-shaped vehicle.
Okay.
That's cool. And it had strange movements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess it was like a Tic Tac.
Yeah. Okay. So it was white as well.
It wasn't white. It was golden. But it could be the way the sun was, shining on it. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I say interesting reported... like that. Sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting that I say it like that because it was golden, because I I mentioned just before we started, I interviewed Ray Bowyer recently and published his ATC recording, air traffic control recording, and he says that the craft he saw were cigar-shaped and bright yellow, which is quite similar to gold.
Fascinating. Oh, yeah, that is very fascinating. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't hold out any I'm not going to give it any kind of like interpretation, like
Mm-hmm.
a extraterrestrial or supernatural, anything like
No.
that, other than to just report what I saw.
Yeah, it was something weird and you didn't know what to do with it. Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Again, this is a question I would have liked to have asked you in more detail, but just in kind of, you can just answer in a couple of words if you can. I was going to say, what do you think happens after we die? Because this is another thing I explore with this show, but do you think we survive death? I guess is a way that I can make it like, in your personal opinion, do you think that our experience continues after the death of our bodies?
I do think that our experience continues. That's what I believe. But I don't know how. Like, I don't have a very set perspective on, I'm not like Plato who says this is what happens. The myth of right? The soldier, I don't have maybe that happens. I don't know. But I do think that our experiences doesn't end when we die.
No, cool. And from my point of view, I've researched that a lot, and the more I research it, the less of an idea of what happens after. I'm more like, I have no idea what happens, but something is basically my answer to that question nowadays. Something happens. Just to wrap this up then, Diana, if you wanted to kind of say any words about I think you've got something that you're working on now, like Beyond the Stars. I'm not really sure exactly what's going on there. If you wanted to say any words about that, if you wanted to say any words about your new book, and then just if you wanted to say any last words, a message that you wanted to leave with people at all, anything along those lines.
Sure. So I teach, I'm teaching a course on UFOs. It's a historical course about UFOs and what's happened and UFOs in history and things like that from different perspectives. I'll have interviews with people that know about this, in the community. And there's going to be two parts of it. One will be an in-person class that I'll teach. And then after that, I'm going to create an online version of that course. So there's going to be that. You can see it on my Twitter page, which is at DW Pasulka, or at my website, which is dwpasulka.com.
I'll link those in the description as well. Sorry, carry on.
Oh, thank you. I also teach a course on the protocols of creativity, because through this research, I found that a lot of people are really talented at, being creative. And so, and I link that to monastic traditions, and I'm co-authoring a book about that. And I also I co-teach a course with Simone Plante, who's an expert at AI, but she's also an expert at these protocols as well. And so we teach a course on that as well.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And so when is that going to be starting, your course and stuff? And when can people sign up to that? And
people will be able to sign up for it probably in February.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll put, like I say, I'll put any links that I can find, and if you send me any links, I'll put them in the description. So if anybody's interested, they can check that out. If it's not for a few weeks, you can send them to me whenever you've got the links, and I can add it in. Thank you so much for giving me so much time today, Diana. I really appreciate it. I like I say, I've left so many questions on the table. Hopefully we'll get to them next time. I guess I should say sorry to my patrons loads of them had questions for you, which again, I didn't manage to get to today, but hopefully next time we'll have time to talk through those.
I'd love to do that. Yeah.
So just if there's any kind of last words or any message or words of wisdom or advice or just anything at all that you want to leave with watched or listened to this.
Oh, let's see. Words of wisdom.
Doesn't have to be. No pressure.
I don't know if I have words of wisdom. I would just say that it's an interesting time to be alive right now, and I think it's what we're seeing here happening in the United States is fascinating.
Yeah, definitely interesting time to be alive and stay open-minded. Thank you again so much. I really appreciate your time. This has been really fascinating, and I can't wait to do it again. I wish you all my best.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Diana Walsh Pasulka. See the description for relevant links and more info. Please subscribe to continue unraveling the universe with us, and if you want to help our channel stay alive, please consider a monthly contribution via Patreon. Thank you.